welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is author extraordinaire, Mr. John Cameron.
Well, thank you for having me.
I appreciate you coming down. I really do. We've got a crisis in journalism and governance going on. Governance. God, I can't talk today. In this country. We're going to start with journalism. Layoffs at the Los Angeles Times sparked industry alarm and there's a crisis. Well, they're claiming there's a crisis in journalism. There's a crisis in mainstream journalism.
Everything's a crisis. When I can't find my car keys, it's a crisis, right? This isn't a crisis. So this is hilarious because the people who are being laid off are not defending the lost jobs on the basis of their excellence in reporting and journalism. They're defending their soon-to-be lost jobs because it will make the racial outcome that they were hired to hit not the same. So nowhere in their defense of their jobs did they say anywhere there were extraordinary journalists. Here's the work we've produced. Basically said, this is racism. And the reason they were hired was reverse racism. The reason they're getting fired is because, like every other piece of crap progressive publication on the planet, they're hemorrhaging money because nobody wants to read it anymore. Or at least half of the population refuses to read the LA Times. I mean...
Well, if the LA Times can't make it in LA, if a really progressive newspaper can't make it in LA, well, where can they make it?
They can't.
And so, yeah, that's the thing. I've gone through all these. There's lots of layoffs in journalism. The LA Times is just the latest.
Sacramento Bee. Sacramento Bee at one time, $500 a share. And now if you can find a share of that paper, it's 50 cents maybe.
And what I have seen, or haven't seen, I suppose, is any self-reflection at what have we done. None of these journalists are looking in the mirror and going, what have we done to drive our customers away? What have we? They've blamed the internet, they've blamed racism, they've blamed the corporations, they've blamed profit, they've blamed everything, but what have we done to mess up what we had? We had the golden goose and we screwed it up.
Well, the internet had something to do with it. I mean, Craigslist basically killed newspapers in this country because people thought all the revenue in them was for the big flashy ads for Macy's and auto dealers and stuff, but all the revenue was in classifieds.
Yes, but why didn't they create their own system?
They lost, well, because they were arrogant and stupid.
They were. So it wasn't the internet. They did the exact same thing as Sears did. When the internet started, what did Sears do? They turned, instead of converting their catalog into both, right, a mailed catalog and an online catalog, or you mail the catalog and they can order online, or some kind of hybrid system, they stopped mailing their catalog completely and didn't get into the internet. So essentially it's the same thing. They tried to get into the internet, but they really didn't. They didn't understand the internet. Of course, nobody did, but the problem is they're still stuck in this old mindset.
I think there's another compounding factor here that these so-called journalists refuse to look at, and that is because they're not reporting the news. They're not objectively reporting the news. They are basically a mouthpiece for progressivism. There's probably what we would call 3 major newspapers in the country that present something that's remotely balanced in reporting, and they're all doing much better than the progressive papers. I mean, if you have a political stance that is perceived as good or okay by 50% at most of the population, and what you write on a daily basis disgusts the other 50%, not discuss, but disgusts, makes people sick to their stomach, are they going to want to read your paper? Are they going to want to advertise their business in it? Are they going to want to advertise their event in it? No, they'll go somewhere else. And they won't admit that their lack of objective reporting on things is a major cause of the failures of newspapers. There's another newspaper, Epoch Times, which is radically conservative and pro-Christian and pro-Trump, which I can't stand, but they do some amazing reporting, and they're growing by leaps and bounds because they're presenting to a starved public something that they want to read.
And
go figure.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to point out is, along what happened is, when the internet came on, these local papers essentially dropped local news and started reprinting.
All news is local.
Right? And so you can no longer find local news on the local newspaper. So why bother watching it? Why bother reading it?
You can, in small town newspapers in this country, are still doing well because they do what newspapers used to do. They show up at every PTA meeting. They have high school football scores. They report on the Chamber of Commerce. They have news about what the supervisors are doing stupid down the block. They do accurate crime reporting. And there are some small town newspapers in this country that are thriving, but no big city newspaper is.
Yeah, when's the last time you've seen a crime report, a real, actual crime reporting in the Sacramento Bee? They may kind of rehash the police's press release.
Well, and even when they rehash that, they label there going to be open gang warfare going on outside of a concert in downtown Sacramento. But what does the headline say? Mass shooting in Sacramento. Not a mass shooting. It's a bunch of gangbangers shooting each other. But you know, if you spin everything in one direction, eventually people aren't going to believe a word you print and they're not going to read your paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to move on. Union membership.
I have an opinion about that.
Union membership is dropping around the country, but one of the surprising things is it's dropping in some places like New York, which is really strange because as union membership is dropping, we have a president who is actually imposing union type rules on freelancers and gig workers. And so it's not surprising to me that unions are becoming less and less valuable to the actual workers because they're doing less and less while taking more and more. Because if you have transferred a lot of your work safety and your work regulations, your pay has been kind of shifted over to the government. It's now done through regulations. What the heck do you need a union for? Unless you have some unique job where you have to get a union contract so you can work around those regulation rules. Because that's the only way you can work around some of these rules, right? Is to sign a union contract. So if you have, like, if you're an oil rig worker, you're working 12-hour shifts, 7 days straight, 2 weeks straight, and then you go off for 2 weeks. You can't do that under normal standard labor rules. No. You have to sign a union contract to do that.
Well, and then what's really upsetting about this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that allowing government workers to unionize was crazy, stupid. Yeah. And this is the great socialist, the guy that ran on limiting government and balancing the budget and all the rest of that stuff. And when he went into power, immediately went to socialism. And he said, so the only places where there are unions now are either in actual government entities or government monopolies or NGOs that are paid for by the government. So healthcare industry, heavily unionized, was basically a government monopoly. City, state, local, federal, all unionized. And unions are at best there breaking even. And even when the Janus decision came down and said that you don't have to belong to a union, state of California immediately wrote a law where pretty much if you want to get out of the union, you can't talk to your HR department, you have to talk to the union rep. So and unions vote basically a straight progressive ticket. I mean, they're not progressives, but they know which side their bread is buttered on. So it's not surprising at all that unions are dying. No,
unions are. When I was a gig worker, when I was a freelancer, and AB 5 came down, right? All these union union people, union types, they were saying, "Well, we're in it for you, but how come none of you talk to them?" I ran for office representing gig workers, and none of these unions came and said, "Hey, we want to talk to you about your problems." Yeah. They had a predetermined solution that they wanted to impose on people who didn't want that solution. And so then we went and had this vote, and we got this kind of goofy hybrid system that's even worse than both ways, except now at least you're not. The people completely untouched by that. Yeah. The people with money. Yeah, the people who could get their cutouts, carve-outs. Doctors, lawyers, insurance agents.
and people in the investment community that have enough money to bribe, lobby politicians for the cutouts. And the most, because of the regulations in the financial industry, they are the most managed group of people in existence. Yet somehow they can be gig workers, whereas somebody who drives for Uber,
drives for Uber 1 hour, drives for Lyft the next hour, works for Amazon for a couple hours. Yeah.
They need to be part of the union.
Yeah, they have to be.
They can't be a gig worker.
They can't be a gig worker. They have to be employees
But
of all
if you
these
pull
three
down
places.
$500,000 a year selling, life insurance, you can be a gig worker.
You're an independent contractor.
Yeah.
You're an independent contractor for State Farm, but somehow you can't be an independent contractor for Amazon because that's, I don't know, abusing you or something.
It's because you don't have good enough lobbyists working for you.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of people working for us, Richard Fields works hard for us, and he got an interesting conversation here coming up about Robert F. Kennedy running for president as a Libertarian ? Because
I'd say big question mark.
Because, well, this is the interesting thing. We're bringing this up because RFK is going to be speaking at the California Convention, California Libertarian Convention this year. And it's not just Robert F. Kennedy. Cornel West, and now yesterday they announced Jill Stein is going to be speaking.
Say what?
Exactly. So let's see what Richard has to say about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. potentially running as a Libertarian for president. We'll see what Richard's got to say.
Does that mean I could run as a Martian?
Maybe.
Cool.
This is Richard Fields with Report from the Fields. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of former Attorney General and presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy, and nephew of former President John F. Kennedy, is running for president. He started out challenging Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries. The Biden campaign, not wanting any challenge to their anointed one, threw up effective roadblocks to his campaign. They told the Democratic National Committee to ignore any results from New Hampshire, where RFK would probably beat Biden in favor of making Biden-friendly South Carolina the first primary state. They refused RFK Secret Service protection, despite his double-digit polling, and despite the history of both his father and uncle being assassinated. So RFK decided to run as an independent and found out how difficult ballot access is, something the Libertarian Party could have told him about. So he started flirting with LNC Chair Angela McArdle. He's scheduled to speak at the California Libertarian Convention the weekend of February 23rd. But most, but unfortunately not all, libertarians saw through the COVID scare narrative and strenuously opposed the economically disastrous lockdowns and the authoritarian nature of the vaccination mandates. RFK and libertarians agree on the virtues of ending our offense policy with tripwire troops stationed all over the world and our propensity to meddle in other countries' squabbles. On housing, he has some good ideas on zoning reform, although that's not really a federal issue. He understands and opposes regulatory capture. He recognizes and opposes the extent to which multiple federal intelligence agencies are spying on the American people. Like libertarians, he's interested in bringing people together on cultural issues rather than using them as partisan wedges. He has some good ideas on reforming our ultra-expensive higher education system, namely making college debt dischargeable in bankruptcy and requiring colleges to share in the losses with lenders when college loans go unpaid. But where the rubber meets the road on economic issues, RFK is wanting. He wants to increase the minimum wage. Good virtue signaling, but anyone with a modicum of understanding of Econ 101 knows that the certain effect of higher minimum wages is a higher level of unemployment, hardly optimal for the poorest among us. He also promises free childcare subsidized interest rates on housing, restricting natural gas exports to ostensibly reduce gas prices domestically, stopping illegal immigration by securing the borders. Good luck with that. Trade deals to protect American labor from foreign competition, and cue the liberal oohs and ahs, addiction treatment on organic farms. He claims it's all affordable by cutting defense spending. That's BS. A quick review of the federal budget reveals that mandatory spending, like interest on the national debt, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, and middle-class subsidies like the ones he is proposing, use up more or less all of the taxes raised. So is RFK a libertarian? No, he's an old-school liberal who gets the civil liberties mostly right, but is on to lunch on economics. Does he have a chance of being nominated at the National Libertarian Convention next May? Depends on who shows up. Based on name recognition alone, he would probably, undoubtedly, get a record number of votes for the LP. But would they be libertarian votes? I'm Richard Fields with Report from the Fields. See you next week.
Well, that's whether RFK is libertarian. No, he's not. I mean, and I'm not even one of those kind of the far, I'm not even an extreme. I'm a fairly moderate libertarian myself. And if I'm saying RFK isn't a libertarian, then he's probably not a libertarian.
Well, the core of all, the primary right that makes all other rights work is property rights. And if you're not willing to start from that premise, you're not a libertarian. I mean, you have property rights and your personal rights, and all of the ideas about he's a statist, but he's right on some civil liberties issues. I think he's kind of a loon on vaccine stuff.
Well, he's all over the place on vaccine stuff.
Yeah, he's
so. Who knows what he even really means on vaccine stuff, which is kind of part of the thing, right?
Yeah.
What does he actually mean on any of this stuff? Yeah. But someone who is a libertarian, John, is Javier Milei. And what could Javier Milei teach?
Javier.
You see
Javier, that? Bring him here, Javier.
Well, what can he teach Democrats and Republicans about capitalism, John?
Everything. Well, it used to be that the Dems were anti-business and pro-civil liberties. And now they're anti-civil liberties and anti-business. So they really have nothing going for them. And it used to be the Republicans were pro-business and, pro basically deregulated environment and financial freedom, and they were pro-property rights and all the rest of that. And they were just in the garbage can about civil liberties. And now the Republicans somehow are champions of civil liberties and have gone into the garbage can on economic issues. So both sides are now statists when it comes to statists, not status, when it comes to anything about the economy. And we have learned from the examples of Venezuela, Zimbabwe, every example, I don't have to list them, the former Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, I mean on and on, that socialism does not work, communism works even worse. It's killed, 200 million people?
At least.
At least, and that's not talking about the poverty stuff that they don't, the loss in lives. The average lifespan in the Soviet Union compared to Europe was like about 15 years less. I mean, it could go on and on and on and on, and I have on this show,
yes.
But I don't need to. No, basically he's saying that any of the statists get in the way of capitalism, and capitalism is what has raised people from poverty over 200 years until we started screwing with it in the early 1900s. And whatever your ilk, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a socialist or a social democrat or any of the other things, just get out of the way, let those people, the capitalists that you think are the evil scum of the earth that have actually lifted 90% of the world out of the worst kind of poverty, go. Let them be the billionaires and trillionaires. A rising tide lifts all ships. And that's what capitalism does.
What Javier Milei should teach the rest of us is that you can sell freedom. It can be sold.
Yeah. Now that's actually, I could have shut up and just let you say that, and it would have been a much better segment.
well, you brought up that governments had become, the left had lost their moral authority on
civil liberties.
Civil liberties. So Justin Trudeau's government was now, by a Canadian court, has now been determined that they used fake intelligence to illegally frame processing truckers as violent extremists, and that the use of their what's the name of that act? It's the Securities Act. It's I can't
even remember all our acts. Much less
the process they
Canadian
used to suppress those truckers was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
So everything.
It's even worse, though.
Yeah.
It's even worse than that.
Yeah. Everything they did to suppress those trucker movements was wrong. Not just wrong, criminal. It should be criminal to use fake intelligence to smear people.
Huh. You're talking about 2016 election, 2020 election. Anyway, so it's even worse than that, because the Canadian government's using the same kind of trickery that the U.S. government is doing. Is they're funding these NGOs, and then these NGOs label people as terrorists or extremists or demand something, and they're using government money to basically censor and create intelligence which is mis and disinformation. It's not misinformation, it's disinformation. And then they use that to basic as evidence to take a law that was on their books that didn't allow them to do what they were doing and do it anyway. And now their Supreme Court, right?
No, it wasn't their Supreme Court.
It was
actually,
regional court.
It was just the regional court.
All right, yeah. Has said that, yeah, what you did was wrong. And they shut down, their bank accounts, and they froze their assets, and they prevented from doing all this stuff. They branded them terrorists, and they weren't. And it was completely made up and trumped up, so that, trumped up, I should stop using that term. And
Trudeau, none of them will be paying a price, John. How much you want to bet? None of those people who did that will pay a price.
None.
Those truckers paid a higher price than the people who violated their Constitution.
Still paying.
Yeah, violated their basic human rights were violated. Yeah. The people who violated them will have no consequence. At best, Trudeau will get bumped out next election. Right? That's at best.
Yeah. And then he'll go on the speaker circuit and
make a ton of money because
$100,000 for talking his commie drivel.
Yeah. It's so frustrating, John.
Yeah. So, well, I think, I'm not saying we need revolution in the streets. And the reason I talk to a lot of libertarians, a lot of people who are anti-government, they say we need a revolution. I said, no. There's only been one revolution in the history of the world where the good guys won. The chances of that happening in our country twice are pretty slim. Because what will happen is the statists will just use it as an excuse to take even more power.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why.
I just want everybody to think about this question. When did our freaking servants become our masters? When did our servants have a separate set of rights that made them superior to their employers' rights? When did that happen?
We're going to leave that question for our audience to ask. Schools. John, there's a report on schools that the schools won't recover from their COVID absenteeism crisis until like 2030. God, I almost said 1930, John.
No, they're not. They're never going to recover. People discovered that schools were a sham during COVID.
This is actually one of the best things I've heard.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these absences are really absences. Yeah. These kids have gone off to do somewhere else. They're learning at home. They're learning in a private school.
Well, a lot of them, unfortunately, are wild in the streets too, though. And then, that's, I don't know how you're going to fix that. I'll tell you what, if any national politician who wants to run for president of the United States wants to win an election, all you'd have to do is say this: I will, with your help, get the Congress to draft legislation, because Congress drafts legislation, to give every single poor person in this country a voucher to use for their childhood education that's the equivalent of the money that the public school district spends. No, make it even better. 2/3 of what your public school district spends. We'll do this at the federal level. And, well, of course, teachers' unions would, spend all the money they got and print some more, but the people that benefit from that the most are minorities, poor people. The people that favor it the most, minorities, poor people. The people that are screwed the most by horrible public school systems, minorities, poor people, and that would fix it. But nobody's got the chutzpah to do that. The
No,
schools are rotten.
No, the schools are terrible.
Yeah.
And it's not even necessarily, it's what they're trying to do now. They're no longer trying to educate your children to the best of their children's ability. They're trying to educate your child to what they want your child to know. And that's actually a vastly different thing, right? Coming in and say, hey, what do you need to learn? What do you want to learn? Let's help you on your path, your educational journey. Rather than, sit down, shut up, listen to the person at the front of the room, and
Oh,
take
by the
this
way,
test.
at least 1/3 of your time is going to be spent on political indoctrination.
And and getting worse all the time.
But what's actually happening is unschooling, which is what you're talking about, where self-directed education, a little bit of parental involvement, that's happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's turning out some brilliant kids. There are stories about 8-year-old entrepreneurs. I mean, it's just when you take the blinders off of kids and let them go after stuff that they love and support them and give them the tools to get there, they can do amazing things. We've never seen the world that can happen with the unschooling.
Kids love to learn, but you have to let them learn their way.
Yeah.
And your job is to help them learn, not to force them to learn. And you'll reach more. What is it? You get more ants with candy, attack more flies with honey than with whatever it is.
Yeah,
Everybody knows this. I can't talk tonight. It's late.
You're doing well. You're doing well.
So we say, John. We are just about out of time, John. We got like 30 seconds left.
I think the Stockman.
Stockman? Yeah, all right, give me your Stockman thing, John.
All right, David Stockman was Reagan's budget guy.
Yes.
Right? And he has flat out said that Trump can't fix the debt because he's part of the swamp. He was talking about draining the swamp. I wish you just said drain the sewer instead of swamp, because swamps are beautiful things.
Well, what's interesting is one of the things Dave Chappelle pointed out is that Trump admitted he was part of the swamp, and that's kind of why people liked him. He was an honest liar, is what Dave Chappelle said. And we are out of time. Thank you, John, for being here. Thank everybody
you very
inside
much,
there for working hard.
James. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the thousands of listeners. Keep those phone calls coming in.
Good night, and please remember to love everybody.